Hi, everyone. It's Danielle Zanzarov from South Bay Wellness Center in Bohemia, and I am super excited to be with you here today. I'd like to do a little bit of talking about allergies and food sensitivities and help you really come to an understanding of where they come from, why we experience them. And then, of course, in our next segment, we'll talk a little bit about things that you can do naturally in order to be able to alleviate those symptoms. So just a little bit about my background. So I am the founder of South Bay Wellness. My background is in natural medicine and functional medicine. And I grew up like most people. I grew up, my brother and I always tell the story. My brother and I, when we were little, we used to sit on the couch and we used to beg, Daddy, please bring home McDonald's. Daddy, please bring home McDonald's. And lo and behold, Daddy would show up with the McDonald's and the Carvel to go right along with it, because Carvel was next to McDonald's. And that was, how I grew up, and that was exciting, except that I also suffered with severe allergies and asthma. And, I had sinus infection after sinus infection. For most holidays, I was the sick one, right? And with the asthma and the allergies, I never ran the mile in school either, because I always had an excuse note because of what I was suffering from. And I thought that that was normal. And the more I learned, the more I realized that these things were just signs and symptoms, and that there was something underlying that was causing these things. And as I began to alleviate those things, I actually got relief from those allergies, from the asthma, from the digestive issues. So I'm excited to talk today about allergies and food sensitivities, because there really is a lot that we can do so that you don't have to suffer from these things. So let's go ahead and get right into it here. So first off, what we're going to cover today is for educational purposes. Of course, everything that we say is for education. You should always speak with your healthcare provider should you decide to make changes or things of that nature. All right, so now let's move right along here. So wouldn't it be nice if, even as we age, we're able to jump out of bed, feel good, have all the energy that we want and need to do everything in the day without things weighing us down, without ending up with hives or tummy aches or acne or, constant sinus pressure or things like that? Wouldn't that be nice? So I'm going to talk to you today about understanding allergies and food sensitivities, in the hope that we can get to the point where you're able to understand what's happening for you and then begin to alleviate some of those things so that you can do those things. Here at South Bay Wellness, we do this with clients day in and day out using that functional medicine model. We look, what is the root cause of what's happening for you? Why are those things occurring, so that we can actually take care of them for the long term. A lot of times people will come in and they'll say, well, I'm experiencing all of these allergy symptoms. I'm just going to, take the over-the-counter allergy medication. But the problem is, the next day, those allergy symptoms are still there. So we really want to get to them at their root so that the issues are solved. So what is an allergy? What is an allergy? So really, to sum it up, an allergy is an abnormal immune response, right? The immune system is having this overreaction to something. Okay. So what happens is, if you take a look at the diagram, what happens is there's some initial contact with an allergen. Okay. And your body says, okay, I see what's coming in. And then it begins to release antibodies, what we call IgE, immunoglobulin E antibodies. And these antibodies kind of attach the cell. Now we have receptors for these going forward. So what happens is, the next time that we come into contact with that allergen, the body goes ahead and basically releases histamine, cytokines, prostaglandins. We have this immune response. So what we call allergies is really an immune response, or an over immune response to something. Okay. And allergies show up in a number of different ways, right? They can show up with eye reaction, runny eyes or red eyes, ears, ear pressure, ear pains, or, the all too common runny nose, okay, watery eyes, the throat tickle, the mucus that forms could end up in rashes or hives on the skin, as well as gastrointestinal reactions. So these are all common allergy responses. So, what about this thing called sensitivities? It's a new buzzword. We're always hearing food sensitivities. Do I have a food sensitivity? So, what's the difference between allergies and food sensitivities? So, first of all, allergies, like we said, they are that immunoglobulin response. Okay, so that's that IgE response, usually can occur right away. It's often very easy to spot. Okay, and it's usually easily diagnosable. Sometimes when there's an extreme response, we call anaphylaxis. A lot of people are used to, for example, the children in school who can't be around peanuts because they can go into anaphylactic shock. This is, something that many of us are used to hearing about and are well aware of. This is what they're testing for when they're running your allergy test specifically, at the doctor's office. But what's a sensitivity? So first of all, in the realm of sensitivity, we have sensitivities and we have intolerances. And these two often get, collapsed also. So an intolerance is actually an inability to digest a food. Okay, so you've heard people say, I'm lactose intolerant, right? So that means that they don't have enough of the enzyme lactase and are then not digesting the lactose that's in their food. So we call that an intolerance. But a sensitivity is an inflammatory response. So it's still a response by the body to something. It's typically harder to identify than something like an allergy. A sensitivity may not be as dramatic as anaphylactic shock. It may not be as dramatic as all of a sudden hives show up. Okay. So a sensitivity is often maybe a little bit lesser of a response that's recognized, but it can also occur over different periods of time as well. It may not be immediate. So it's kind of like, every time you eat a sandwich and you're exposed to gluten, you find that, you're having an argument with your spouse that evening. So it can cause different types of responses by the body, and they may not be as immediate. So what are some of those sensitivity reactions? Well, sensitivities have been shown to relate back to metabolic syndrome and obesity, diabetes. Okay. Oftentimes, we have a lot of clients that come into our office that have food sensitivities that are the result of leaky gut and such. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And they end up with things like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, rheumatoid arthritis. So we see, a connection between sensitivities and leaky gut and autoimmune issues, or those other kind of myalgias that aren't specific, okay, where we're having a lot of different symptoms, not pinpointing what they're occurring from. Of course, there's the dermatological, so the skin issues that show up as well. But we also see behavioral changes, things like insomnia or depression or anxiety or ADD or ADHD or even migraine headaches that can be the result of things like allergies, but also food sensitivities. And then, of course, we have all of the gastrointestinal issues that show up as well. So these are just some of the things, and you can see here why it's difficult to be able to identify different sensitivities because they're showing up in so many different places. So how do we identify them? Well, very common today. So for an allergy, they'll often run an IgE blood test. That's very common, or they'll do a skin prick test and look for a response. Well, we're looking at things like food sensitivities, though. We're looking at something a little bit different. We're looking at IgE and IgA, that the tests are the ELISA test, the ALCAT test. These are very common tests that are done. There's a lot of speculation in the scientific community about the validity of a lot of these tests and what are they really showing, how much of it is exposure versus how much of it is an actual, biological response to something. One of my favorite tests is a pulse test. So if you eat something and your pulse raises, it could be that that thing is something your body is having a response to. This is an easy, at home, simple test. All you have to do is kind of sit down, grab the piece of food that you're a suspect with. Just taste that food after you're calm, right? Take your pulse, place the food underneath your tongue. You don't want to chew it because you don't want to raise your pulse artificially because you're chewing, but just go ahead and take your pulse then and see if there's a response. You know, I've even seen it where they've identified, you know, food sensitivities with handwriting tests, doing a before and after of handwriting, before a food and after a food, to see if there's a changes in handwriting. One of the big things that we do in our practice, and that is standard practice when it comes to sensitivities, is also an elimination diet. So actually eliminating those things from your diet for a period of time to see how you do with it. And a lot of people come in, they say, oh, I eliminated gluten, I saw no difference. How long did you eliminate gluten? Oh, I did it for 2 days. So when you're doing an elimination diet or elimination protocol, you're looking to do it for a much more extended period of time. Okay. And then there is also what we do a lot in our practice is kinesiologic testing, which is like a form of a advanced muscle test where we're identifying what that body's actual response is to the food. So there's a lot of different ways that you can identify if you're having a food sensitivity. So what are some of the top foods to be aware of, both for allergic responses, but also for food sensitivities? So gluten, dairy, soy, nuts, eggs, corn, and shellfish. These guys are at the top of the list. But what you should be aware of is that essentially any food or chemical, okay, or environmental can be something that we show a response to. So how do these things occur? So one of the first things to take a look at is digestion, right? Because this is how we get exposed to a lot of things. A number of things enter our body through the digestive system. And our digestion can be very easily compromised. You know, sometimes food isn't broken down properly. Maybe we're having issues with not having enough stomach acid, or we're not having enough enzymes, or we're not eating the right kinds of foods, or as we're eating foods and we're bringing in toxins because we're eating in large amounts of processed food, for example, we end up creating damage to the lining of the small intestine, right? Which is something that we end up calling leaky gut. So our gut should be nice. The cells should be closed up like this. What happens over time is there's more and more and more inflammation from abuse. It's like the shingles on a roof, they begin to separate. And as they separate, what would happen to the shingles on your roof? The house begins to leak water. And so it's the same thing with the digestive system. Now you have things leaking into the gut that were never intended to leak in. So that's what so-called leaky gut is all about. And so really we'll talk about this later on, but the best thing to do is work on healing your digestive system, right? You should not have heartburn. You should have solid 3 great soft serve ice cream bowel movements per day. That's what we should have, good digestive function. We should make sure that we're chewing our food, we're eating relaxed. These are all important pieces. How else can we end up with these things? Well, there are some other key players. So first is liver congestion. Our liver is responsible for detoxifying. It is responsible for eliminating all the toxins that we're exposed to. And the less the liver can manage with its time, the more congestion begins to take place. Or diets that are heavy in fried foods or fats or just oils in general, high oils, high animal protein. These things can create liver congestion. And then the body, when it comes into contact with something, then because the liver congestion causes the body to create more histamine, what happens is there's an excess amount of histamine that's released when we're coming into contact with whatever that allergic item is. And now again, we've got that over response. So liver, gallbladder congestion, there can be an issue when it comes to allergies and food sensitivities. The other important piece is thyroid function, and we often take this for granted. And the thyroid, is another essential player when it comes to detoxification. And what's important to note here, though, too, is the thyroid plays a role with the liver, so it helps in the detoxification process, but it also helps with the liver and what the liver should be doing in terms of its response to toxins that are coming in. So these guys also play a major role. So just to recap here, so allergies and sensitivities when we're talking about food are two very different things, right? One is an immunological overreaction, an immunoglobulin E response. And the other is still an inflammatory response, but it's a little bit less specific. There's still some debate and controversy as to exactly where that definition can lie. But allergies are usually immediately understood, whereas sensitivities, may not have that overt acute reaction in the same way. All right, guys, so it was a pleasure giving you this brief overview today. We're going to talk next about some of the things that you can do to really begin to heal the allergies, food sensitivities naturally. Have a good day.